Well, again, good morning, and whether you're joining us online or you're here in this room, good morning and welcome again. I forgot to mention, Christy was on her way this morning over to John, and John's physical therapist had requested, doctor requested that Christy bring his guitar, so she was delivering his guitar to him this morning, so that'll be good and fun. Okay, now I have to admit something this morning. My opening illustration is not perfect. And in fact, it may not be perfect simply because on the one ground, it may not make sense, but on the second ground, it may strike fear into your very heart this morning because my opening illustration is a math problem. And not even, it gets even better. It's going to be a word problem. And aren't you excited? Aren't you glad you came to church today to do math? This is awesome. Now, okay, now here we go. Let's say a train is headed south at 47 miles an hour and an ice cream cone melts at 4 ounces per 15 minutes. At what point in time, I'm just kidding, that's not the problem. Yeah. Okay, now, let's say someone, and I'm going to pick on Bill and Bess. You guys are too kind and they have no clue. They have no clue that I was going to do this. But let's say Bill says, you know what? We're going to get ice cream for the youth group next Sunday. So he goes out to the store and Bill finds this screaming good deal on Bluebell ice cream. And of course the best flavor is Moose Tracks or something akin to that. Yeah? See, I like that, right? Yeah. And by the way, if they ever come up with a Coca-Cola flavored ice cream, and I know Coke floats are fantastic, but if they ever come up with that, I'm going to gain an additional 600 pounds overnight. But, so, Bill finds this great deal on Bluebell ice cream. The Bluebell ice cream costs $5 for a gallon. Good deal, right? $5. Okay, now, he buys this $5, and, you know, of course, he sees there's hot fudge right there, so he picks up some hot fudge. He goes to the cash register, and he says, hey, it is $8 on the dot. He's like, wow, it never, ends right at $8. It's always some cents or whatever. $8 on that. So he gets home, and Beth says, hey, this is great. This is ice cream. This is fantastic. But Beth says, hey, how much was the hot fudge? I'm thinking we need some for ourselves, and I want to know how much it is. Well, Bill can't remember how much the hot fudge was. So how do we figure it out? A bit of algebra. And in full disclosure, I had to make sure I was doing this right with my daughter Salem today. So, now we know that Bill remembers, and we know that the ice cream costs $5 a gallon, right? We know that the total was what, $8? Yes. Right?
I'm confused.
So $5 plus whatever the cost of the ice cream, and we're going to make the variable y. Why? Because it's yummy, right? Ice cream's yummy, the variable is y. So, so how much is it going to cost? How much was the hot fudge? Now, what does every good teacher do when you say $3 is the answer? What do? Show your work, right? So, how do we do this? So, we need to isolate the y. So, we subtract 5 from this side. We subtract 5 from this side. This is 0 plus y equals 8 minus 5. Y equals 3. Did I do that right?
Wow.
Everybody see that? Yeah, pretty cool. Now, let's say it's moving on an arc over kind of the tangent reach. I'm just kidding. So, y equals 3. Now, what does every good teacher then say to you? Check your work. And how do you check your work? You put the variable, you put the amount back into the equation to make sure it works, right? Let's do this. And you're like, Daryl, you're an idiot. I got this. So, 5 plus y equals 3 equals, true statement?
True.
Makes sense? The equation is solved. It is whole, it is complete, it is right. Okay? So, good times. All right, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next week. Okay. We are in a series called Weekends in Wisdom, and today we're in the book of Ecclesiastes. And I encourage you to take your Bible, open up to the book of Ecclesiastes, and each week we're looking at a book these weeks in the portion of the Bible that is called the wisdom literature. So the books of like Proverbs and Psalms and Job and Ecclesiastes, and next week Song of Solomon, which will be an adventure. But today we're in Ecclesiastes. Now here's the question, and here's what Ecclesiastes starts to kind of poke at for us. I should have titled this sermon, When Doubts Arise, or When Questions Arise in Our Lives. This is what Ecclesiastes is going to push into. Because oftentimes, and I think we've all experienced this to some degree, we may have come to the realization that even after we've achieved what we've been hoping for, or we were able to buy what we've been wanting to buy, or we've been able, or even after success, and even after pleasure and fun and relationships, we still feel that something's missing, right? Let me put it this way. Have you ever experienced like a dish that, I mean, whenever you ate it, it was like, this is the best tasting food I've ever had. Only to, maybe it was a month, or maybe it was a year, maybe it was 10 years, only to return to that dish and be like, yeah, that's good, but I like something else now. How many of you have ever experienced something that has brought tremendous joy and satisfaction in your life, only with time to realize, like, not so much? Right? Ecclesiastes is saying, listen, you can come, like, what do you do? Why is that? Why is it that I can have tremendous success, and I can have tremendous amounts of pleasure, and I can, only at the end you all just say, is that all? Disconcerting to us, isn't it? Even wisdom, even church, even faith. Am I allowed to say this? Can feel like that. You know, I used to have, it's just hard sometimes. Sometimes life feels a bit, what's the word? Meaningless. Sometimes life feels a bit absurd, right? Sometimes we got too many variables. We don't know why. It feels like just when I think I've got stuff figured out, it moves, it changes, and I don't have it anymore. It's like trying to grasp after smoke. Could it be that where we're looking for meaning, where we're looking for satisfaction, where we're looking for contentment, where we're looking for hope, could it be that those things like money, success, power, position, health, wealth, name it all, relationships, could it be that we are asking them to do something that they are ill-equipped to do? And could it be that we need to be looking somewhere else? We need to look for the why somewhere else. And that's what Ecclesiastes is all about. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1. And let's just get a quick flavor of this. Forgive me, I can't remember what I told you for this verses, but to read. But let's just, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 1, just to get a flavor of this. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. Verse 2, ready for this? We have verse 2, sorry, Earl. I don't know what he did. Meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. Wow, aren't you glad you came to church today? Meaningless. Life is just utterly meaningless. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. Right? And it's like, this is the opening, declaration of the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible? Where's Jesus? I need some good news. See, like Proverbs and Psalms, this is a collection of literary types and bits of wisdom that are collected together, and it deals with our preoccupation with the material and temporal things of our lives that we look to for meaning. We look to for hope and satisfaction. But what do we have when it's all gone? So, a look at the structure will help us get an idea of this book. So already we've looked at verse 1. Verse 1 says, the words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. So right now in verse 1, we see that there's a narrator that is going to narrate. The narrator is the person who's going to, he's going to narrate. He's the one speaking. But what is the first thing he does? He introduces a second person. And the second person is the teacher. And so what's going to happen is that he's going to say, here's the narrator. Narrator says, here's the words of the teacher. The Hebrew word is kohelet or something like that. And it's a very interesting and unique word. It just means someone who people gather around. Sometimes it is translated preachers, and teacher's probably a little bit better translation, but we get the idea. The teacher, the wise one. This is the wise person. This is the teachings of the teacher. And here are his words. Look at chapter 12, verse 8 at the end. Chapter 12, verse 8 through 14. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. And not only was the teacher wise, but also he imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads. They collected sayings like firmly embedded nails given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. And he goes on. So what do you have? The very first verse is the narrator introducing the teacher. The very last verses are what? The narrator speaking again, saying, these are the words of the teacher, and this is what he said. So here's my point. This narrator is going to frame everything, his argument. He's going to frame his discussion on this important topic that we all know, that we've experienced to some degree or one another, right? And he's going to say, listen, he's going to introduce and he's going to conclude, and he's going to allow the teacher in the middle to make his point. Does that make sense? So when you read through Ecclesiastes, you're like, okay, there's a narrator explaining something, but he's going to allow the teacher to do the talking until the end. Okay? We're good? Sometimes this guy's called a frame narrator because he frames his argument on both ends. Okay. So go back to the beginning of chapter 1. And the opening lines of the teacher, again, are meaningless, meaningless. Says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And did you remember what he said? The conclusion the teacher said, or the narrator says at the very end? He says the exact same thing in chapter 12, verse 8. Meaningless, meaningless. It's all utterly meaningless. So do you see the beginning and a similarity, identical similarity at the end? And again, you have this bracketing of an argument. It's like, and so what that does is, he says meaningless, meaningless, and then you get to the end, meaningless, meaningless. And what you do is you look at everything in between to see the point that they're making. We good so far? Just kind of, I know like narrow the structure stuff is kind of boring. But it helps us understand what the teacher and what the narrator, the purpose the narrator is using the teachings of the teacher to try to communicate. We know from the very beginning and emphasize at the very end that the main point that life sure seems meaningless, right? I'm going to state it in the beginning emphatically. Meaningless, meaningless. And then at the end, yeah, it's still meaningless. Kind of a downer right now, right? So let's look at, before, we're going to look at a little bit of what's in between. But before we get there, we need to define this word meaningless. It's kind of an important word, right? He repeats it all the time. It's repeated big. It's like this emphatic declarative summary, really. Chapter 2, or chapter 1, verse 2, is literally a summary of the entire book. Or the summary of the entire teachings of the teacher, I should say. Meaningless, meaningless. So what does this meaningless word mean? See what I did there? No pun intended. This word in Hebrew, if I understand it right, is chabel, H-E-B-E-L or H-E-V-E-L. You can kind of a V-B combo, as you say it. It's kind of a guttural chabel. And this word is a rich, rich word, full of meaning, right? This word does not mean without value or importance. Okay? If I hear the word meaningless, I can it's, it just doesn't have value. It's worthless. I don't think that's what this word means. It's, first off, one theologian defined it this way. Meaningless means it's absurd. To be chabel is something that is an affront to our reasoning, affront to our senses. It just doesn't make sense. Okay? So, or another pastor or teacher put it this way. This word, literally, it's like the word for like vapor or smoke. And the picture here is that it's fleeting. It's like a vapor, a mist. It's just like here, there is, and then gone. And then in correlating to that is, it's this picture of, have you ever tried to grab smoke? To catch it? When just when you put your hands around it, it goes away, right? See, this is the picture of what this is chabel. This is, this is meaningless. It's like chasing, one of the verses talks about, it's like chasing after the wind. Good luck with that, right? Life is absurd sometimes, isn't it? Doesn't make sense. Remember we looked at the book of Job? Yeah, that's like chabel on steroids, right? Like, this doesn't make sense. Here's this guy doing everything right, and yet, wham! That's absurd. That doesn't make sense. Whatever, right? Life is fleeting, isn't it? You ever wake up and be like, what? It was just yesterday I was running marathons or whatever, Feels like just yesterday my kid was, it feels like life is fleeting. Life is a paradox, shifting. Can't quite grasp it. And just when you think you got it figured out, 2020 shows up. Well, that'll mess with your head. Chabel. Meaningless. Let's see what he says. Turn back to chapter 1, verse 3 through 11. Again, two meaningless. Meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is chabel. Verse 3, teacher says, what does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns and blows to the north. And round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. The place the streams come from, there they will return again. And all things are wearisome, more than one can say. You ever been there, by the way? Sure feels like everything I'm dealing with is just tiring. Everything is wearisome, more than I can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. There's no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. Okay, we got a picture? Yeah. Dum, dum, dum. What is the picture here? What is the teacher emphasizing? What does man gain from all his labor, which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go. The sun rises and what? Sun sets. The rains come and the water flows and it goes into the streams, and then what happens? It goes into the ocean, and then guess what? Does it all over again. There's nothing new under the sun. It's been done over long ago. It was like, hey, Daryl, wait a minute. Wait. Computers are new. That's brand new. It is, specifically. But is it the first time someone's created new technology? Is it the last time someone's going to create new technology? There's nothing new. How many life-changing, world-altering things have we have? Like, look, this is great. And it's like, yeah. But guess what? It's going to come again. And he ain't the first one to do it. Meaningless. And by the way, you think you got a name for yourself? Think you're going to be, remembered forever and ever? Yeah, right. Huh. We may remember a name. We may even remember a few events in history from specific people. But do we really remember them or know them? And given enough time, you ain't going to remember them. How many of you could name the 8th President of the United States? I know I couldn't. It ran the United States. So, the emphasis, the theme here is time. So, sun rises, sun sets. Time. It's just the march of time is just, okay? But look, now, so that's kind of the beginning. Now look at towards the end of the book in chapter 11. Ecclesiastes 11. We're going to start in verse 7. We're going to go through chapter 12, verse 7. Okay? Ecclesiastes 11. This is get towards the end of the book. And end of the teachings of the teacher. 11, verse 7. Light is sweet, and it pleases the eyes to see the sun. However many years a man may live, let him enjoy them all. But let him remember the days of darkness, for they will be many. Everything to come is meaningless. Be happy, young men, while you are young. Absolutely be happy while you're young. And let your heart give you joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see. But know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment. And so then banish anxiety from your heart and cast all your troubles of your body, for youth and vigor are meaningless. Verse 12, chapter 12. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach, when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows grow dim. When the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint. When men are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags himself along and desires no longer is stirred. Then man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. Remember him before the silver cord is severed, or the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring, or the wheel broken at the well. And the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, all utterly meaningless. So the first part of the book is speaking of time. What's the end of the teaching talk about?
Material things.
Material things. Death. Right? I mean, check out all these these euphemisms here. It's like when the wheel broke off at the well, and the bowl is broken, and just to be clear, when the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. When you're young, enjoy life, because guess what's gonna happen? Have you guys seen the mortality rates lately? They're alarming at best. And so what the teacher is saying in all the wisdom is saying, time is going to keep marching, meaningless. Death is the great equalizer. That's not my words. Lots of people far smarter than I have made that observation. And that's the observation of the teacher. And everything in between, by the way, death comes to the wealthy as well as what? The poor. Death comes to men as well as we kind of speed the process up seemingly, but you get the point. Whether you're white, black, red, whatever the color of your skin, what happens? Right? So, it is the absolute great equalizer. Death comes to those who follow God as well as those who don't. Or maybe not following God. Well, we kind of understand it, but well, that's the same. You can live your life perfectly, right? You can, none of us do, but we could live our lives in like absolute wisdom. Right? We can do everything right. Our finances, our relationships, our friendships, our work, you name it. We could do it right. What's going to happen? Right? So this is all about death. These two themes, time and death, are going to weave themselves through and all the implications and what that means through the rest of the middle of the book. And so he said, listen, and part of he's like, listen, when you're young, enjoy life because it's coming. Enjoy life knowing that death is coming, and you will stand in judgment before God. That's wisdom, right? But enjoy it. And so in between, the teacher says, listen, you know what I did? Because I was like, you know what? I'm gonna figure this out. And so he goes and he does all these tremendous achievements. Builds these incredible, structures and amasses incredible wealth and all this incredible stuff. And what does he find it? He finds it to be
Meaningless.
Meaningless. Chabal. It's absurd. It's like chasing after the wind. It doesn't make sense. And because it's just not status and pleasure. He goes through, the teacher's like, listen, I did everything under the sun. Whatever I wanted to do, guess what? I did it because I wanted to make sure to see if meaning was found there. Only to find out that what? It ain't. Meaningless. Work and toil. I worked till my fingers bled. What did I get? I got some good stuff. I got a little bit of money. But, yeah. Chabal. And then even wisdom. Now this is interesting. It says even wisdom and the acquiring of wisdom is meaningless. Chabal. Can you say that? Is that allowed? Like, wait. The whole book of Proverbs and Job, I mean, it's like it's all, what? Listen, he's not saying it's worthless. It just doesn't make sense. Because remember, you could live your life perfectly like Job. Because wisdom doesn't guarantee bad things ain't going to happen. It's chabal. It's meaningless. Does that make sense? So, again, these, it's chabal, it's absurd, it's a vapor. We can't eat, even when we think we got it all figured out, like as I said, something changes. And what do we need more of? We talked about this. We all need more wisdom. And then when we think we need it, what do we need more of? We need more wisdom. Because it's hard to get a hold of. We can't get it all figured out. It's chabal. So what does the teacher conclude? And go back to 11. We've touched on this. But what does the teacher conclude? Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse 8. So he concludes, be happy, young men, while you are young, and let your heart give joy in the days of your youth. Follow the ways of your heart and whatever your eyes see, but know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment. Look at chapter 9. Back up a little bit. Chapter 9, verse 7 through 10. And maybe you've heard these words before. Chapter 9, this is the right chapter, sorry. Verse 7. Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart. For it is now that God favors what you do. Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, in all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun, all your meaningless days. What does the teacher conclude, as we've said? Live a life. But sure, understand that, there's a lot of it that's just going to be absurd. There's a lot of it that ain't going to make sense. It's going to feel like you're chasing after the wind. It is meaningless, but you might as well live your life. You might as well live your life with joy and enjoy what God has given you. He's giving you life. He's giving you food. He's giving you a wife. He's giving you, right? So enjoy it. Celebrate it. Live. And just know, live accordingly, wisely, that one day it's going to come to an end. Live with the understanding, resolve to the understanding that it's kind of absurd. It's kind of meaningless. That's the conclusion of the teacher. Okay? All right. So Daryl, is all you're saying carpe diem? Is that it? No. That's not it. That's not what Ecclesiastes is teaching. Because we know it's not just the teacher speaking in this book. Who else? Who's using the teachings of the teacher to make his point?
God.
The narrator. You got it, right? The author, who's anonymous. But the author who's speaking the words that God wants him to write down. So, chapter 12, verse 9 through 14. The conclusion of the matter, the paragraph heading, if you got NIV, it says, again, the teacher concludes. The narrator says, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, everything is meaningless. And continuing on verse 9. Not only was the teacher wise, but also he imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched for just the right words. And what he wrote was what? Upright and true. Now, here's what I want the narrator to say. This is what I want him to say. I want him to say, hey, you know what? That teacher who talked about the absurdness and the meaningless and the death and the time and the march and the forgetting, you know what I want that? I want him to be wrong. Right? I mean, I do. When I read this, I'm like, okay, this makes me feel really, really uncomfortable because now I'm staring at my mortality. I'm staring at the absurdness and the vaporness and the fleetingness of life, and I'm like, I'm not liking this. I want the teacher to be wrong. And what does God say? The Hebrew here is, yup, what he said is right. That's a joke, but it's true. The narrator says, everything that you just read, that I made sure was sitting in the middle of this book, is true and upright. And the teacher chose just the right words, just the right thoughts, and he's communicating exactly truth. Well, now that's not very comforting, is it? In fact, what's the result of this truth? Verse 11, the words of the wise are like goads. They're collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. These words are like goads a shepherd would use, maybe like the good shepherd, who's going to prod us and poke at us and say, hey, I need you to feel this. I need you to see this. I need you to walk through this. I need you to experience this. I need you to recognize the reality of the chabel of life. Because because I want to teach you something. I want to move you something. I want to help you come, right? These are goads, but how many of us love to be poked and prodded? But what is the conclusion? Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body, as every student has cried out in study in his class. But verse 13, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. I love it when the Bible is crystal clear on, like, here's the conclusion, here's the point of the whole book. Like a lot of times, like, oh, what is it really saying? I think we can figure out what it's really saying. Ready? Here's the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and what?
Keep his commandments.
For this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it's good or evil. What's the conclusion of all matter? Everything this guy has said, everything the teacher said is true. Here's the conclusion, what? Fear God and obey his commandments. Oh. Wait, the absurdness of it all, what's the solution to the absurdness? What's the conclusion? Fear God and obey his commandments. Deuteronomy chapter 6, I have this. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. The great Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And it goes on to say the idea that obey his commands. So this fear God, and we've defined fear God last week as this. Remember, it's a knee-knocking sense of awe. A knee-knocking awe of God, which acknowledges our place of utter subordination to him. We are utterly dependent and subject to God Almighty. And when we stand before him, as much as we want to be flippant and say, and as much as we can confidently and graciously come before God, we need to recognize, oh, we're coming before God Almighty. That's fear God. That is a proper relationship, a proper position, a humble position. That is a relationship with God. The conclusion of it all is to have a proper relationship with God that motivates us, that results in us obeying his commands. Which, by the way, are really, really wise and good, aren't they? Mm-hmm. Wisdom and meaning, answers to our doubts, the answers to the why, is found in relationship to God. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Is that accurate to what the conclusion of the matter is? Fear God and obey his commands. To be in a proper relationship with God who loves you has proved it because he died for you. That's the one we fear and obey. That's the conclusion. Because we wonder why, after everything, something still seems missing. We need to figure out what is missing and plug it back into the equation of our life. And then maybe it'll begin to make sense. When we solve for why, and that part is really, really important, we gain our true meaning and understanding. Lasting meaning, lasting purpose, true success, contentment, perspective, wisdom, hope is found in fear of the Lord. And when we plug this truth back into, now follow me with this, when we take this idea of fearing the Lord and obeying his commandments, and we begin to plug this truth back into things like our achievements, what happens? They gain value. They gain meaning. When we take this idea of fearing God and obeying his commands, and we put it back into our marriage, we put it back into our finances, we put it back into our leisure, into our pleasure, now these things are no longer meaningless. Now they begin to have, to make it be a little less absurd. Maybe this will help. Hang with me and we're going to wrap things up here with this. I'm indebted to theologian Barry Webb, who wrote a great little book called the Five Festal Garments. We got a picture, I think, on the screen of this book. Interesting, short little book. Talks about several books of the Bible. Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Ecclesiastes, and so forth. And so I'm indebted. A lot of this is going to come from here to give credit where credit's due. But let's walk through this with me. Turn to Romans chapter 8, verse 19 through 24. Romans 8, 19 through 24. Paul's writing, obviously. He's going to write this great chapter, these great paragraphs. Romans 8, 19 through 24. Yep. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to what? What's the word? Frustration. Not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it. In hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its what? Bondage to decay, and brought into the glorious freedom of the children of God. Verse 22. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes in what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Now, you're like, Daryl, what does this mean? Remember the picture of, and remember the beginning of Ecclesiastes? He was talking about the sun, and he was talking about the rivers, and the rain, and the mountains, right? He's talking about creation, right? What does Paul start talking about is groaning in frustration in the first part of, as I just read. He talks about creation. All of creation is what? Groaning in frustration. Now, it's not a one-for-one translation or anything like that, but I sure feel like this word frustration is kind of like chavel. Creation is groaning, and it's absurd, it's like chavel. Not only creation, but we are all groaning too, aren't we? How many of you, when you got up this morning, were like, crawl out of bed? Or how many are like, oh, good night. Oh, boy. Right? That is our bodies. We literally groan, don't we, sometimes? Because it's not right, and we yearn for something more. What are we yearning for? We're yearning for the redemption, the redeeming work of Christ. That one day, this broken, frustrated chavel of a life in creation gets set right. And he talks about, he's like, listen, that is our hope. But it's like, it's not just hope because it's a done deal, it's a certain fact. Right? We know, scripturally, biblically speaking, that as individuals who are in proper relationship with God, through belief, faith, and trust in Jesus Christ for the forgiveness of the sins, right? The gospel of good news, because this is what the word hope in Paul writes. This word hope is like he said, it's a word that summarizes the entire gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. And as individuals who have that, we have the certainty of a future where God makes everything right and we're no longer living a chavel existence. And that's good news, isn't it? You see, that's the proper relationship through Jesus Christ with God that brings meaning into our chavel of a life, perspective, and hope. And then it gets better than this. It gets even better, right? That's big picture. Let me get that, Daryl. I understand that. That's okay. That's good. But you know what? Tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up, and either I got to go to work, or I got to go to yet another appointment, or I got to man, I'm still hurting. I'm still whatever. Ain't nothing changing. It sure feels like, what in the world how does the gospel help me today? Let me give you one example. Turn to 1 Corinthians real quick in chapter 15, verse 58. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 58. Therefore, my dear brothers, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to what?
Work of the Lord.
Work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is what? Now hold on, did you catch that? Work as if you're working for the Lord, and your work will not be in what? Meaningless. Your work, what you are toiling towards, as if you work as for the Lord, whether that's picking up garbage, whether that's diagnosing illnesses, whatever it is, when your work, because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, is now transformed into something that is not meaningless, but is something that is not in vain, that has meaning and purpose. And if God can do that for work, imagine what He can do with all the other areas of our lives that we try and we search and we say, hey man, maybe if I just have this, everything will be okay. Or if I just get this, or if I just achieve that, or if I'm just... Imagine if the gospel can breathe and resurrect those areas as well. So now, our leisures and our pleasures are meaning. Right? They're not just killing time. They're an act of worship. They're an act of expression of love and gratitude. You get the idea. You can go right on down the line. That's the application. That we fear God and obey His commands. And we take that proper relationship, which is called the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we plug it back into the areas of our life that we have been trying to force to give us meaning and purpose and hope, and they fail. It's miserable. But if we allow God to use those and transform those, then we can see the hope that He gives. And that's really good news. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for dying on the cross so that we can know you personally. That yes, we can come before you in a knee-knocking sense of awe, and yet we can still come before you as one who's loves us, and died for us. God, thank you for the good news that transforms not just our Mondays and Tuesdays, and not just our Sundays, and not just the easy areas of our life and the fun areas of our life, but thank you that your gospel transforms each and every area of our life. And God, thank you that the gospel, the good news, transforms our eternity. Because we trust and we realize that it's because of your work of Jesus' death and resurrection on the cross that our eternity can be transformed from havel, from absurdity, from meaningless, to something like Revelation speaks of. Behold, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and He will dwell with them. They will be His people, and God Himself will be with them and be their God. Thank you that you will wipe away every tear from our eyes one day as your followers. And that there will be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Thank you that by your death and resurrection, you will remove the havel of our life and our eternity. And all we can say is we love you. In Jesus' name.